Good evening, everyone. It is August, 20th? This is Sandy Shallis tonight. I got a good show. And the title being that is Why Civilizations Collapse. Well, I get down these rabbit holes. You know I get down all these rabbit holes. And this rabbit hole was pretty interesting. So as long as we're good with hearing and all, I'm going to get started with tonight because it's kind of a learning experience. It's kind of geek night. It's kind of like let's do a deep dive into something different than politics and yeah. All right, let's get going. I'm going to just quickly say hi, Anthony Davis. Hi, Kim, Raza. And this is great. I did this only on YouTube. I'm not on Facebook tonight. I really didn't want to deal with the multi-stream and all that crap. Because as people join, I want to get started. I did not make a video. I'm going to get this up on my screen so we can look at, and this is really cool. Hi, Raza. It's really nice to see you, Raza, by the way. This is some cool stuff I found. And the article is Why Civilizations Collapse. Now, we're not talking about climate change tonight, and we're not per se, we're not per se talking about like Donald Trump collapse like that, but this is really cool information. So as I read it, the author, whose name is Samo Berja, he puts links in his article to different things. So it's kind of like we have this mini presentation tonight. And I think that we're going to like this. We're going to dig this. Hi, Jody Connolly. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to move the chats to the side. And you guys have to decide what you want to do here. If you want to listen and learn and we go through this whole thing. As long as I sound good, Basil's here. This is cool. Let's get going. Okay, this is a teaching night, kind of, and I think I have everything ready. So, why civilizations collapse? And the author's name is Samo Berja. Samo looks like this, and let me see how it looks for you. Okay, very cool. Samo's quote is, "There has never been an immortal human society. I work on figuring out why." Very interesting. What a rabbit hole, you know. I don't know what to make quite of the Long Now Foundation, that he is a research fellow, but I'm going to say it's almost like the antithesis of how we think. And we think in the short term. We think in the collapses coming from climate change and all the things that we know. And this is really different. I'm looking for their, wild stuff. Wait a second. I want to get okay. This is what they are. They are, they hope to provide a counterpoint to today's accelerating culture and help make long-term thinking more common. We hope to foster responsibility in the framework of the next 10,000 years. The next 10,000 years. And most of us, what can we think? The next 10 years? Right? All right, so here we go. I'm going to get started. Have fun. Why do civilizations collapse? This question bears not only on safeguarding our society's future, but also makes sense of our present. The answer relies on some of the same technique that humanity needed to build civilization in the first place. We have to evaluate the perceptions that mint facts and theory, not merely peruse the body of theories handed down to us. Sorry, I need to stretch. Everything kind of hurts. All right, sorry. Institutional failure comes as a surprise. And now the first link goes to an article that Samo wrote in April of 2018, Institutional Failure as a Surprise. So this is a whole rabbit hole, guys. Oh my goodness, it is definitely a rabbit hole. So but an interesting as hell one. So because organizations try to hide their shortcomings, they lean on other, more functional organizations in order to keep up appearances. During civilizational collapse, no organization can properly hide its own inadequacy, since the whole interdependent ecosystem of institutions is caving in on itself. States, religions, material technologies, and ways of life that once seemed self-sustaining, they turn out to have been dependent on the invisible subsidy of just a few key institutions. The environment of societal collapse reveals much of the otherwise obscured inner workings of crucial social technologies. After all, to analyze something is to break it apart. So, despite being an excellent epistemic opportunity, and epistemic is like, deep dive research going back. Anyway, civilizational collapse seldom inspires introspection among thinkers living through it. If I get far away, you can't hear me anymore, right? Mayan or Roman thinkers don't seem to have reflected on their ongoing collapse. As institutions turn to cannibalizing each other, there is little patronage or emotional energy going towards accurately describing the wider process. The notable exception that proves the rule of civilizational delusion is the Zhou dynasty of ancient China. It is an encouraging example since it shows a societal failure arrested and reversed by an intellectual golden age called the 100 Schools of Thought. Guys, I got down that rabbit hole. I haven't been feeling well. I was at the 100 Schools of Thought. It's cooler than cool. Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism could only come into being with this kind of epistemic opportunity. In the West today, we operate under the influence of our own key philosophy, which we call Scientism. Now, I'm going to click on this one and we're going to look at it, and I'm looking at your things. Scientism is the promotion of science as the best or only objective means by which society should determine normative and epistemological values. The term scientism is generally used critically, implying a cosmetic application of science in unwarranted situations not amenable to the application of scientific method. That's how we all think. A lot of us, right? So we act as if we are already living in a scientifically planned society, immune to collapse on a timescale that any of us have ever had to worry about. And this is very far from the truth. We are certainly living in a socially engineered societies. I hope you like this, guys. But they are not scientifically planned in any straightforward way. Our organs of economic management do not secretly know how the economy really works. Our systems of political regulation are operating on the fumes of their institutional inheritance from 2 or 3 generations ago. 2 or 3 generations ago. The last spurt of institutional growth in Western societies happened roughly during the 1970s. At this time in the United States, new federal bodies such as the Department of Energy and Education and I lost my article. Energy and Education were created and organized, such as NASA reached their modern form. Concurrently, the United Kingdom dispensed with organized labor as a political force in favor of an expanded administrative apparatus. And France saw the the resignation of Charles de Gaulle, the architect of the Fifth Republic. Neither country's political economy has evolved much since then. Civilizational collapse always looms on the horizon, though we usually think of collapse as a slow process. It can, in fact, happen very quickly, as was the case with the late Bronze Age collapse. And there's a book called 1177 BC. Okay, the Bronze Age collapse. Marauding groups known only as the Sea Peoples invaded Egypt. The Pharaoh's army, blah, blah, blah. You get it? We're going back to the thing. The old dictum, gradually then suddenly, is cliche, but accurate. To ascertain whether or not we are headed for collapse, we must first analyze the functionality of our own society and pinpoint where things go wrong, right? The mechanisms of collapse. Our society is dominated by large bureaucracies. These bureaucracies break down the processing of physical goods and information into discrete little tasks, such as how a factory worker puts doors on a car or a stock trader buys futures contracts. I was just seeing how long I was, and I'm good. These tasks are shorn of their context and executed in a systematized environment whose constraints are quite narrow. Put the car door in, increase the portfolio value. Our society is thoroughly compartmentalized. This compartmentalization isn't driven by the division of labor, rather by the need to make a use of misaligned talent without empowering it. By radically limiting employees' scope of action, you make office politics more predictable. And I worked in it, I know. By fragmenting available knowledge, you can leverage information asymmetries to the intellectual or material advantage of the center. Some of this is necessary for scaling organizations beyond what socially connected networks can manage, but move too far towards compartmentalization, and it becomes impossible to accomplish the original mission of the organization. So such large bureaucratic systems do not emerge organically. They require design and implementation. Let's see what he says here. He's got another article, How to Use Bureaucracies. Oh, very interesting. What is a bureaucracy? Boy, we could go down this rabbit hole all night, but we're not. So they require. So empirically, we can know this simply by examining intent of the original founders of these systems. If you want to know, say, why the FBI exists, you can find the answer in the documents of its founder, J. Edgar Hoover. You could do the same for the IRS or for Amazon or for any other, number of institutions. It is very difficult, though, to apply this analysis to the construction of society. No matter how large or how small, institutions always coexist in a symbiotic relationship with other institutions. There is no Amazon without the United States government, no U.S. government without at least some parts of the U.S. economy. Each of these institutions depends on the other in an intricate mesh. Society is not a single institution. After all, it's an ecosystem of interdependent institutions. So in addition, non-functional institutions are the rule. So what he's saying is really non-functional, that functional institutions historically have been not the rule. They are the exception. Functionality is the exception here. This is what he's saying. Let me check in with you guys. I've been in the chat. Are you enjoying this? I hope so. I hope so, because this is really interesting stuff to me. We always talk about, as I said, we talk about different kinds of collapse. but we don't talk about these civilizations. And I want to get to some of the interesting things. Some people spend their entire, and we talk about this, I think, in the progressive circles. Some people spend their entire lives ruthlessly profiting from the misery of others or greatly contributing to the prosperity of others without even knowing they are doing so. People who try to affect change are most often frustrated. Countless people spend their lives wrestling with a societal problem, slaving over papers for publication in academia or the non-profit world. They act as if there is some sort of metaphorical wall which they throw their papers over, with some responsible person on the other side taking the output of their disinterested scientific study and translating it to policy, medical practice, or industrial production. More often than not, there is nobody on the other side of that wall. Since society is so deeply compartmentalized, it rarely functions as a whole with a single purpose. Note, the dysfunctionality is not a normative distinction. It often boils down to the simple reality of whether or not anyone ever follows up on key actions within the institution. It is also a question of whether or not there is a multiplier, be it individual, bureaucratic, oligarchic, behind this metaphorical wall. Institutions often become non-functional due to loss of key knowledge at critical junctures. Now, I found this was really interesting. And he goes on to talk, and I'll go a little forward because he goes on to talk about how much we've wasted in material and money in our the dysfunctional society. We lose knowledge, okay? Civilizations collapsed. Then looks like this dynamic at the scale of a entire civilization, a low-grade but constant loss of capabilities and knowledge throughout the most critical parts of our institution. Doesn't that seem like it's happening now? The dumbing down of the United States? Maybe, I don't know if other countries are quite anywhere where we are. There might be a sudden point where the superstructure gives way dramatically, such as occurred during the Bronze Age collapse, or there might be slow accommodation to this convergence to zero, as with the Byzantine Empire. The key dynamic here is the loss of subtle social technologies that allow us to solve the secession problem. So it's like, secession planning in a job, secession planning in a business. In the case of ancient Egypt, it would have been making sure that Pharaoh's son knows how to interact with all of the powerful people in Egypt and has an intuitive feel for the subtleties of public order, diplomacy, and famine prevention. Exactly what we really don't have. So that's where he goes into the secession problem. And then he goes into traditions of knowledge. And he says, if you create an institution with a false premise in order to mislead society as to your true goals, the people you hire into it might be fooled by the propaganda themselves. This is why claims about multi-generational conspiracies are always highly suspect. Such organizations are plagued by secession failures in knowledge. And we're talking about, everything, companies, government, communities. Avoiding collapse is so difficult because secession failure is often opaque. I think this is cool stuff. If the Institute of Pottery lost the ability to make good pots, to mold people into skilled pot makers, would they declare it to the world? Of course not. Institutions are very rarely self-abolishing. The same holds true throughout crucial niches of our society, from social engineering to science and philosophy. All of these areas could be in profound crisis today. We wouldn't even know it. The intellectual apocalypse is invisible if there are no true intellectuals around. Again, institutional failure typically comes as Surprise! It comes as a surprise. So then he goes into, oh my God, my email open. I'm going to go down to the history because I am 20 minutes. And I hope you're finding this as interesting as I am. We can define civilizational collapse as a process wherein most recognizable large-scale institutions of a society vanish, coupled with a drop in material wealth, a drop in the complexity of material artifacts and social forms, a reduction in travel distance and physical safety of inhabitants, and a mass reduction in knowledge. Oh my goodness. The loss of knowledge is especially damaging since it accelerates the other aspects of collapse and ensures that they will be long lasting. Then we're done. WASF, we're done. Nearly all of the written evidence we have of societal decline comes from the elites. Historically, and I found this so fascinating. Literacy was restricted to the traditional elite class of society, as they were the only ones with any use for reading and writing. This accounts for the total disappearance of the writing after the late Bronze Age collapse, since the Bronze Age societies had a very small literate class. The result was a wholesale loss of civilizational knowledge. So when writing reappeared in the Eastern Mediterranean centuries later, it was based on the new Phoenician alphabet rather than the old hieroglyphic system that gave birth to the cuneiform of the Assyrians or the linear B of the Minoans. Such losses of knowledge are a constant throughout human history. Just as he was talking before, fog bank, or as with New Jersey scrambling to find a COBOL programmer with the ability to overhaul their legacy information systems. Oh boy, if you've ever been through one of those, if you've ever been through a program like that, and I was a subject matter expert in a legacy system, and we went over to Oracle. Holy crap, it was a year or more. And it was meetings, and it was documenting every little step of every little process. But I find this fascinating. So I thought you would. We're going to go down. A broad historical literature of collapse does exist, especially on the late Bronze Age collapse and the fall of the Roman Empire. But the scholars that pose these questions often have particular and popular answers in mind as to what causes collapse. Environmental fragility, moral decline, an overloading of systemic complexity, and so on. The morality play is written first. The facts are found second, and this often results in a shoddy final product of a theory. Thus, the relevance of history for investigating our own society's potential collapse is also obvious. Without comparing the present to other civilizations, we can't say much of anything useful about it. It is hard to come to a consensus on historical cause and effect. In geology, we didn't build another planet to discover the Earth's plate tectonics, but we dug among the rocks on which we found ourselves. In our macro study of history and civilizations, we too must rely on in-depth exploration of historical examples. That exploration is still itself theory-driven. Good historians and theoreticians explicitly acknowledge the thesis they work with. And so he says, I will do the same. My theory of the history is the great founder theory. The great founder theory. That's another article. And it was, I guess, a draft from his book. And see, he says, I'm going to tell you, it's pretty interesting. He says everything's decided by that little back room we're bitching about the Democrats having with the cigars making the decisions. Well, he says, He says social technologies do not evolve out of mass action, but rather are devised by a tiny subset of institutional designers. Looking at history, we see that new organizations and social forms often arise within a single generation, showing jumps in societal complexity far too rapid to be explained away by collective action or evolution. This would be the equivalent of expecting a tornado tearing through a junkyard to assemble a Boeing 747 or a Tesla Cybertruck. Designing complex objects through collective action, or perhaps through an intermittent individual strategy similar to the open software approach, is tempting. However, unowned commons tend to be rated, and individual visions tend to differ massively. It often takes an exceptional individual with exceptional vision to create a new social or material technology. It's hard to remember nowadays that the smartphone once had to be devised as a combination of the cell phone, the tablet, and the camera, and did not merely emerge out of mass market sentiments. It took a single individual, Steve Jobs, to see that while a combination of the car, the airplane, and the submarine would produce an inferior version of all three, the opposite case would be true in the creation of the smartphone. And then that individual had to implement the vision. The result is usually one or more institutions created by the individual to carry out their goals. Individuals are not so naturally self-documenting. The descriptions of themselves they provide can be misleading. Suppose you were watching the birth of a mystical movement like the Franciscans in the 13th century. At that time, you might describe them as a cult of new God. But an observer in the 15th century world, according to the institutional information available at the time, described them as a movement firmly within the Catholic Church. In theory, the Franciscans have always been good Catholics, but this only gets recognized after a struggle has played out. In the Middle Ages, you could often believe any heresy you wanted as long as you formally declared your loyalty to the Pope. A different example might be the United States government today. Oh boy, can't get away from it. No, I knew this was coming. Read it. A different example might be the United States government today. A keen observer would examine the way that laws are made today and conclude that we have witnessed the emergence of a new legislative body, all but in name, with Congress reduced to a vestigial organ of this governing structure. Law today is made mostly by the Supreme Court or the civil service when it chooses what to implement and how, or occasionally via presidential executive order. Yet very few people today come to such a conclusion, as the ideology of American government dictates that law is made in Congress and does not make room for the development of new federal legislative bodies. If no one believes a hypothesis, the evidence for it remains unnoticed, even when such evidence is abundant. Such thinking requires going beyond both public appearances and official narratives. The definition of the law that we use in 2020 can't help us here. Rather, we use the term law in the same sense one would use it empirically. Let's look at the 12 tablets. What were the 12 tablets? That was in ancient Rome. Do you remember the 12 tablets from school? Oh my gosh. Rabbit hole. And that was in ancient Rome. And the laws of Sparta, Sharia law in modern-day Somalia. Okay, I'm going down. Something seemingly as objective, battle. Okay. Something as seemingly objective as the occurrences of a battle can only be inferred from scattered artifacts that other people have found, or the writings of long-dead strangers. Moreover, battles are relatively low complexity. All right, I'm going to go down because we know about material signs of collapse. I didn't want to go more than 30 minutes on this. And it's so good. Material evidence can provide something closer to objectivity, at least sometimes. Okay, the archaeological record shows that many large Roman cities were depopulated over the course of the 4th and 5th centuries AD. As indicators go, this is a fairly clear and obvious sign of high urban society decay. Indirect evidence corroborates this, such as the reduction in atmospheric lead pollution generated by Roman mining activity leading up to the collapse of the empire. If we assume that mining activity is related to economic production, this is a good indicator of economic decline. But even material evidence can be unreliable, since understanding it requires a high degree of contextual knowledge. The interesting question for the prospective collapse of our own society is this. If you were a late imperial Roman and someone told you about the ongoing decline in atmospheric lead, how would you process the information? Today, if we saw a drop in lead pollution, our first assumption might be that this is due to the advent of greener technology. Economic decline wouldn't naturally come to mind. Victory has many fathers, but defeats an orphan. We find it hard to believe that we were once more capable of intentionally affecting the world than today. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, wanderers among the ruins of aqueducts concluded that they must have been built by giants. The classical Greeks examined the massive stone ruins of Mycenaean civilization and assumed that the great walls were built by a race of cyclops. My God, history is amazing. Our persistent failure to understand the monumental achievements of the past speaks not to the historical prevalence of pyramid-loving extraterrestrials, no, but rather to the fact that we often lose the knowledge of the social technology on which such material artifacts rested. It is easier for us to conceptualize an extraterrestrial force that constructed the pyramids than it is to conceive of the political and economic system that made such architectural feats possible. Such loss of knowledge gives us an idea of our limited ability to maintain advanced social systems over generations. So if we compare the roughly 12 identifiable dark ages following civilizational collapse on the Eurasian continent, the collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations, the end of Mohenjo-Daro, the decline of Roman Empire, Han China, and so on, we'll always find that nearly all material technology is not self-perpetuating, but rather rests on the foundations of social technology. The only material technologies that routinely survive collapse are small-scale agriculture and small-scale metallurgy. I don't know. I have the worst time saying this word. Metallurgy. Likely, it's like a tongue twister. Likely because the social technologies needed to sustain such smaller communities can arise organically. Now, I'm going to go down because it's a very long article, and he's going to go through a lot more. I think you guys should read it. Collapse is silent. Ooh. When collapses, we can look at this one really quick. When collapses occur more slowly, it is even more difficult to find anyone acknowledging the process at all. That was true of the late Roman Empire. Oh, yeah. That was true of the late Roman Empire. And they said that they were much less the constant burning of cities, so much it was the GDP equivalent shrinking. In the context of adaptation to the COVID-19 pandemic, markets seem to be fairly stable. Boy, this is a long article. We've got to do this. I could do this in 2 parts. I want to see what you guys are talking about. And maybe I'll do it in 2 parts. Do you think you guys are going to actually read it? Did you like this article? I thought it was really interesting to talk about history, going back. Do we learn from history? Can we take those lessons when we're in it? When you're in the middle of collapse, can you suddenly step back and say, hey, this is what happened. I'm just using my words, basically. This is what happened. And, what is it that you're saying? Gazer, gazer. Silent, like slowly cooking the frog in the pan. Yeah. Well, it was pretty good. I have the link up because it's very long. I mean, but the thing is, I should have picked maybe a few more, because he goes into the Manhattan Project and the Apollo program, and he talks about solution. But I'll read you the last. I'll read you the last paragraph really quickly. The solution lies, maybe we'll get disappointed, who knows, with a small number of people who can independently judge the generative minds behind the facts, rather than merely minding the integrity of the established body of theories and observations. If there is such a thing as a technical, he says technique, of civilization, the skill of managing the institutions of society and culture, it exists in very narrow corners of society. Engineering society to be self-perpetuating is an extremely difficult challenge, and we can devise all sorts of machinery to do so. But this is the bottom line. Such people are extremely rare. But if we create a socio-economic niche for them, our civilization can rewrite its own future for the better. And that goes back to the beginning, where it was about his organization. And they talk about, they have a different view of hope. Let's see. When the population is a society, clueless consumer individuals, there is no hope. Well, there's a lot of consumers, and sometimes it's an addiction. And I'm not saying I'm addicted, because I can't afford to be addicted anymore. I'm glad you all came, though. I hope you enjoyed this. I really do. We don't talk about history very much. We don't talk about our lives in the preface of history. I'd like to go through a little bit more. I really wanted to find this guy's thing about hope, and not about his writing. I just really, if I could look for this, it would be really cool. It's the other foundation that he's in. Maybe it's called the Fortnite Institute. Let me just pull this up before I go. I can't help myself. I got to share this with you. The Fortnite, advancing technology for the long-term benefit of life. Ooh, it's kind of eerie stuff. It's like new wavy eerie. I think. Oh my God. Yes. But they're a nonprofit. Okay, this is what I wanted to read to you. Take it for what it is. Foresight Institute is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1986 on a vision of coming revolutions in technology that will bring extraordinary opportunities as well as unprecedented challenges. Foresight's mission is to steer those revolutions toward futures of existential hope. If we push in the right directions, learning, teaching, arguing, shifting directions, and pushing further, then we may yet steer the technology race toward a future with room enough for our dreams. Well, that's a mouthful. And I read it earlier and I thought, woo, that's a mouthful. But when you listen to Peter Wadhams and he talks about the only hope is being CO2, carbon removal, and then you read something like this and they're all into the technology, the techno-utopians, I suppose. I don't know the catchy names, I don't. But anyway, thank you for coming. And I see, let's see, Mia. Hi, Mia. Mia says, I've always felt that America thinks of ourselves as a particularly ahistorical society. That's a really good comment because we're so relatively young in the scheme of things. I was reading about BC China and the sophisticated societies that they had before the sophistication of what we have. It's mind-boggling, and it's also interesting to take that trip backwards and oh, sorry, use your mind's eye. You know, use your mind's eye, and we could use it for better now. Hi, Rick Larson. It's nice to see all of you. Oh, I'm so glad Rick came in. He's like the guy I'm learning everything about gardening from. Hi. Oh my gosh. It's so good to see you. Well, oh yeah, Groot says we need to move the California fire to Washington, D.C. Are you guys happy? It's nice to see you, Rick. I love your videos. Your little videos have taught me so much. And you are like, Rick is like a permaculture growing guru. I mean, I can't even tell you. You got to go to his channel because it is you, Rick. Yeah. Okay. I know. Hope is wishful thinking. But those people, I told you, it was the antithesis of what we always talk about. And these people are sitting here. Well, they're saying 10,000 years, and the Native Americans always they always talk about 7 generations. Say la vie, I brought you something interesting. Peace out. Good night. Thank you so much. Enjoy. Bye.